Covering the Kamala campaign's been disorienting. First, she was the most unpopular VP in history. Then she's Mrs. Messiah. Her record's radical left. Then she agrees with Trump, but her values haven't changed. Okay? Her VP's wooing white dudes and Obama's scolding the brothers. She hid from CNN for 5 weeks. Then she turned down the Fox debate. Now she's playing footsie with Rogan and begging to come on Fox. Well, be careful what you wish for, because Kamala Harris just sat down with Bair for a half hour, and she was roughed up so badly, Pelosi's asking Joe to get back in.
How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration, because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but do you, just a number. Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Bret, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have an
it's a rough estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question, I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
And when you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies. So looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
The first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the... Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please?
But
you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate,
and they didn't bring up that bill. I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising, and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
We recognized from day one that, to the point of this being your first question, it is a priority for us as a nation and for the American people. And our focus has been on fixing a problem.
This was the first time the vice president and the Democrat nominee had ever had to answer for herself. She spent more time defending herself with Bret than she has defending the actual border. Then it got personal.
Former President Clinton actually referred to Laken Riley Sunday campaigning for you in Georgia, saying if those men had been properly vetted, Laken Riley probably would not have been killed. So if it wouldn't have happened, this is well before any negotiation. This is well before Donald Trump got involved in the politics. This is a specific policy decision by your administration to release these men into the country. So what I'm saying to you, do you owe those families an apology?
Let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There is no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred. So that is true. It is also true that if a border security had actually been passed 9 months ago, it would be 9 months that we would have had more border agents at the border, more support for the folks who are working around the clock trying to hold it all together.
Bair is giving Kamala an opportunity to say if she were president, Laken Riley would have been alive. Kamala should have said that's something I would have done differently than Biden. I would have secured the border much earlier. But I was just the VP serving at the pleasure of the president. And if you vote for me, I promise I'll protect women like Laken Riley. At this stage of the campaign, saying, I'm sorry about the dead woman on my watch, it's all Trump's fault, it's not going to fly. Harris has never been pressed this hard on her border policies. And it continued.
Madam Vice President, it was a policy decision in the early part of your administration. I will let one of the mothers talk about it. Take a listen.
Because of the Biden-Harris administration open border policies catch and release, they were enrolled in the Alternatives to Detention program. This meant that they were released into the United States. It was not even a full 3 weeks later that they would take my daughter, Jocelyn Nungare's life. I believe the Biden-Harris administration open border policies are responsible for the death of my daughter.
That's the early days. So do you owe them an apology is what I'm saying.
I will tell you that I am so sorry for her loss. I'm so sorry for her loss, sincerely. But let's talk about what is happening right now with an individual who does not want to participate in solutions. Let's talk about that as well.
But do you want to answer
in
her?
all fairness, I told you, I feel awful for what she and her family have experienced.
During that time, you said repeatedly that the border was secure. When in your mind did it start becoming a crisis?
I think we've had a broken immigration system transcending, by the way, Donald Trump's administration, even before. Let's all be honest about that. I have no pride in saying that this is a perfect immigration system. I've been clear, I think we all are, that it needs to be fixed.
Kamala just said the border's always been broken, but it was secure for 3 years when Laken Riley was murdered. That doesn't make any sense. How did Trump break the border that you said was secure? You can't follow Kamala's logic because there is none. She doesn't know anything about the border. She doesn't care about the border. She just doesn't want anyone talking about it. Her whole interview was a continuation of a cover-up. Watch.
Madam Vice President, you call Donald Trump.
The significance of that.
You call Donald Trump. He's misguided. You say now
he's unstable. He is unstable, Bret.
He's not well. You say he's mentally not stable.
He's not stable.
Let me ask you this. You told many interviewers that Joe Biden was on his game, that ran around circles on his staff. When did you first notice that President Biden's mental faculties appeared diminished?
Joe Biden, I have watched from the Oval Office to the Situation Room. And he has the judgment and the experience to do exactly what he has done in making very important decisions on behalf of the American people.
There were no concerns raised?
Bret, Joe Biden is not on the ballot.
I understand.
And Donald Trump
but
is.
You talked about it.
And Donald Trump
After George Clooney said within a few minutes of talking to President Biden at a fundraiser that he thought this was not the same Joe Biden that we saw on the debate stage.
Donald Trump is on the ballot.
I understand. You met with him at least once a week for 3.5 years. You didn't have any concerns?
I think the American people have a concern about Donald Trump.
So Kamala Harris didn't want to talk about Kamala Harris, and she definitely didn't want to talk about Joe Biden. She never once touted the accomplishments of the Biden administration, not a single one. She just wants to prosecute Donald Trump. But America doesn't want to prosecute her. We want a president. At one point, she just snapped.
This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it. And this is what is at stake, which is why you have someone like the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying what Mark Milley has said about Donald Trump being a threat to the United States of America.
Why didn't we see anger like that about the border, about prices, about crime? Never kind of showed that flash of anger when it was affecting millions of Americans. She wasn't likable. She wasn't charming. She was never funny. She wasn't warm. There was nothing gracious, eloquent, or reassuring about this performance. Then Bret asked her the question that she's had a week, actually the whole campaign, to think about. Watch this.
So you're not Joe Biden, you're not Donald Trump, but nothing comes to mind that you would do differently?
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes into office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership. I, for example, am someone who has not spent the majority of my career in Washington, D.C.
Okay, she spent 8 years in Washington, D.C. That's twice as long as Trump. And what would you do differently? She said she'd bring fresh new ideas. Then she never said what the ideas were.
Your campaign slogan is a new way forward, and it's time to turn the page. You've been vice president for 3.5 years. So what are you turning the page from?
Well, first of all, turning the page from the last decade in which we have been burdened with the kind of rhetoric coming from Donald Trump that has been designed and implemented to divide our country and have Americans literally point fingers at each other.
Madam Vice President, more than 70%
percent
of people
that is
tell
about turning the
pollsters,
page on rhetoric that people are frankly exhausted of, Bret.
if you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
But you've been the person holding the office.
Come on.
Madam
You
Vice
and I
President.
both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is that over the last decade,
But
people
you're the
have
lever of
become.
power.
But listen, over the last decade, it is clear to me, and certainly the Republicans who are on stage with me, the former chief of staff to the president, Donald Trump, former defense secretaries, national security advisor, and his vice president. One, that he is unfit to serve, that he is unstable, that he is dangerous.
So turning the page isn't turning the page from Biden. She's going to do everything the same. She's just turning the page from Trump, who wasn't in office. Her slogans don't even make sense because 79% of the country wants to turn the page from her. This is what an actual Kamala Harris interview should look like. Bret gave her the same treatment as he gave Trump in the spring: respectful, firm, and persistent. We didn't swap her answers to make her look better like CBS. We didn't invite little Timmy along to hold her hand like CNN. This was a big girl interview, and she flopped. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews.